Hello, ladies and gentlemen. The future is tokenized. We have an amazing stream for you today. We have Dan from Zengate, and we have Charles Hoskinson, the CEO of IOG, and I'm also Big Pay. How are you guys doing today?
Good to be here, Big Pay.
Yeah, doing great. Doing great. Great to see such big stars to the left and right of me.
I'm excited to be here. I was told about this last week, and how could I say no? And honestly, we'll jump right into it. During the initial stages of starting IOG and Cardano, could you share a specific example that encapsulates a significant challenge you faced? And how did you and your team manage to overcome this challenge? And what key insights did you gain from that experience?
Well, Dan was there almost at the very beginning. We went through a lot of trials and tribulations. I mean, the biggest issue was that cryptocurrencies were not well understood in Japan, and that was kind of the founding nexus of the Cardano project. And while we had the best of intentions, we kind of got lumped in and rolled in with a lot of stuff that wasn't the best of things. Because back then there was one coin and all these other things, and there was kind of a negative view in mainstream Japanese society about tokens. And they're like, well, what is this? And why does this exist? Why should we care? So we were never having a conversation from zero to something. It was always from -20. And you had to earn your way to zero and kind of get there. It almost reminded me of like The Simpsons, where they had the franchise-a-thon and they had the guy with the picture straightening, like the frame straightening, and it's like, here's our franchise manual includes like, who are you and why are you here? These types of things. So we had to get through it, which was fun, and it took about a year to kind of get that flywheel going and get people acknowledging it. And then we had the opposite problem, where people kind of overdid it, and they created sometimes unrealistic expectations about things, and part of it was dialing things back and normalizing it. So it was either too little or too much, and kind of getting that Goldilocks zone was quite challenging. I don't know, Dan, what would you say, from going back to our 2015 and 2016 days?
Yeah. No, I think that's right on point. I remember a lot of noise. It wasn't the very, very, very beginning. It wasn't like the Bitcoin is fresh and new era. It was, there was a lot of noise. There was a lot of, there were a lot of scams as well. I mean, a lot of this was warranted because we basically launched during this whole, ICO phase, right? Especially in Japan when the rules changed, there were a lot of ICOs, and you think Japan is like a society of honor, and everybody's so honest, and there were a lot of scams out here. And the Japanese got really just cautious right away. So we had to deal with that. We had to deal with noise around it where we actually weren't known at all, right? There wasn't really any serious media about us. Charles was the only one that people actually knew. And so I literally had to do this back in the early days. I had to go through the internet, go and search and see if there's any news that would come out about us. And if it ever did, 9 out of 10 times it was kind of like, well, I read this stuff on Twitter about them, and I don't know about these guys, but it's not my opinion, but it's the opinion of all these Twitter people. And so you have to really kind of fight against that to make sure that, the message is clear and the narrative is clear, because you don't want people to just take it and run with it and you have no answer to it.
Oh my Lord. They were the master of the Trump before anybody else. Is like, hey, I've been hearing over the internet some things. I don't know if they're true, but if they say it, where there's smoke, there's fire. And then just imagine that in Japanese on Twitter. Yeah. And oh God, that was like, what was the name of that diner we used to go to in Osaka? It's kind of like
Royal Host.
Yeah, Royal Host. Yeah, exactly right. Yep. We'd have these horrible days, and then we'd just go and like the Perkins of Japan, Royal Host, and you go and get your like tonkatsu, which is just absolutely terrible for you, and kind of the crappy soy sauce on it. It'd be like, all right, at least we get our food. I miss Royal Host. Is that still open? It's
that's a thing still out here. In fact, the one that we used to go to in Morinomiya, right next to Osaka Castle, is still there for you to revisit anytime. Anytime you're in Japan, revisit old trauma.
I worry about having to, move forward from a negative now with Jason Derulo token launching and Caitlyn Jenner token launching, and I really hope that's not people's first intro into crypto.
Yep. What was that song? Detachable Penis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you don't want it to be the first intro, but it kind of is, the same thing that a lot of these things were out here, that are now dead. And I mean, the bottom line here is you just have to fight through the noise. You have to fight through the noise. You have to, and you have to stick to your narrative, right? So what you're doing is right. And this is actually what spoke to me right away about what Charles was doing back in the day. I don't know if you remember this or not, probably do, Charles, is, I had my first talk with Jeremy out here, but then we spoke for something like an hour on Skype, and you kind of laid it out for me, and until then I was like, I don't know, these guys, and they got that, the black and red website with Russian, English. It was, what is it, English, Russian, and Japanese. We had it in 3 languages, pretty much text only. And and then Charles just laid it out for me, and I was like, oh, okay, now I get it. I get it now.
Yeah, we had such a weird development team, of the original Cardano, the pre-Byron era, when we were still putting things together. Alex Chirpinoy and kind of the proto-Ergo guys during the Scorex days were there. We also had a Russian team that was true Russian. They were in St. Petersburg, and that was called Sarakel, led by Arseny Soroka, who looked like he was a male ballerina, and he was a crazy guy. And his co-founder Jan Mostovoy was a really interesting guy too. He had all these weird phobias, so he never could travel, and he was always just hanging out in Latvia. And then we had Argentinian team at the same time. That was Alan Verbner down in Buenos Aires, because Nico Bentanides, who was the COO at the time, he had a really good set of contacts down in Argentina, and we'd just work together with them. And so you had Russians, pseudo-Russians, and Argentinians with a Japanese team getting into the UK elite academic circles. And those were some crazy meetings in the beginning. And we're like, we're going to do it in Haskell, and what the hell is this? And oh man. And then we try to make it work in Japan, and we were looking for functional programmers there, and they're like, who the hell are you guys? what are we doing? Is it drugs? We're like, no, it's crypto. It's like, it's got to be drugs or something.
Might as well be drugs back then.
Exactly. It was such a crazy time. I don't know how we did it. I was working 18-hour days literally every day for the first 2 years.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It definitely, it was one of those stages where you knew that if you get through it, there's light at the end of the tunnel. There's something great at the end of the tunnel, but you have to get through it. And this wasn't like days or months. This was years. This was literally years. Charles was at it from 2015. I joined the team in early 2016. I mean, I remember this. When we were actually when I just joined, and until we launched mainnet, it was like a year and a half, right? And within that year and a half, now, right now it's governance. Everybody's talking about governance. The community's talking about governance. The company's talking about governance. But back then it was, will we launch mainnet, right? We have to launch. And that was the thing, that was like the big prize at the end of the tunnel. And that tunnel was like 2 years long. So some people don't even realize how much effort it took to actually get to launching Cardano beyond what it is today. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting time.
Yeah, I'm curious. After your time in Japan, you guys started focusing on emerging markets. What were the initial goals of these trips? And could you share any unexpected outcomes or lessons that later influenced strategic decisions?
Well, the goal was always emerging markets. I mean, my TED talk was from 2014, which predates the Cardano project. And if you look at some of my early Ethereum work, I was talking about emerging markets as well. And there was a great symbiosis there, because Japan cares a lot about emerging markets, ironically. Very few people know that, but the Japanese have a ton of investments in Africa, Southeast Asia, and other places. So it was a natural partnership, because they have kind of a mentality of just go ahead and buy and build for 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. Like if you look at the Shinkansen, which is like the bullet train, you'll meet people whose grandfathers worked on it, fathers work on it, and the kids are now working there. So you go to a country, and you're like, oh, it'll take 50 years to build this. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, we're 2,000 years old. 50 years is really not that much time. So, we always wanted to do something in Southeast Asia and in Africa. The Emergo guys, because one of the guys who helped found them was based in Cambodia and Vietnam, had a really nice lock on that market. And they said, let us take Southeast, like Indonesia and Thailand and Vietnam, and these things. And I said, that's great. I'll go to Africa and we'll set that up. And Dan, he had a lot of experience operating in kind of the former Soviet republics, Eastern Europe. And we sent him out to Georgia, like in one trip. Literally, I have a meeting with the prime minister of the country. It's like a state visit. You got to tell him about Georgia. That was just nuts.
Yeah, no, Georgia was it was an interesting trip. So it all started with so back then we launched. We started building up a community. It was known. We were known. There weren't. It wasn't just like scrape the internet once in a while. Somebody talks about us. Oh, I don't know about these guys. We had a community. And so people started reaching out to us. And Charles, I mean, he was, he was traveling like 340 days out of the year.
Yeah.
And he's always got stuff going on. So he doesn't really have time to follow up on a lot of these opportunities that came in. And so that became my job. After we launched, I switched over to business development. And so I started following up on everything that would come into Charles's mailbox and just really pursuing them, seeing what makes sense. And there was one opportunity where somebody contacted us from Georgia and said that, hey guys, this is we have a lot of different opportunities here, and we love Cardano. And so I said, hey, Georgia, I know Georgia. I'm Ukrainian, so of course I know Georgia, and I know all the great things about Georgia. So at that point, I was actually working with during the early CF days. I was in Zurich. I was in Zurich for about a month. And before that, Charles and I were in Tokyo. And I come to Charles and I say, I remember we were in that really weird tiki lounge at the hotel in Tokyo. Yeah, this hotel in Tokyo. It was built by this really famous Japanese industrialist. And it has the most weirdest like tiki lounge in the middle of it. And so
God. I think we had drinks there with like Mike Parsons or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, I forgot about that tiki lounge too. There's, Japan is like the ultimate place to go for the bar, the custom bar with some sort of theme. Like, what's that block in Osaka that's got all the tiny bars inside of it? It's
Minami Dotonbori. It's Dotonbori.
Yeah, Dotonbori. And I remember I would go there like, go to one, it's like there's a guy who'll hypnotize you, and then you go to another one, and they'll like fat women will slap you, and then the one you have like a naked Japanese guy on a table and he's beating the person, and he's like, come back half hour. We're like, whoa, I don't know, man. You shut the door and you just walk off. Japan has that, and then you go to another just totally normal bar, and it's all in just one block in one particular area. But that's where all the business is done. You go there, it's just like, what is going on here? And then you talk to some guy, he's like, oh yeah, I used to be the CEO of Sony. Like, what the fuck? it's like okay. But what's nice about it is you meet some lifelong friends, and all the people we met from back then we still hang out with. Like, I'm going to Japan in September for for Token 2049, and it's all the old G's, and you just walk in, you haven't seen them in 10 years, and it's just like you haven't talked in a day. They say, oh, how's the family? How's everything? It's the same conversation.
Yeah. No, it's everything, everything has a really long arc out here in Japan. It's not like a quick thing. It's a long arc. Takes a while for the culture to accept what you're doing. There are obviously a lot of progressive minds out here, but the culture is very conservative. So you have to really understand that when you work in Japan, and you really have to accommodate that with your business. But then you can't get stuck. So it's kind of like, that middle. So going back to Georgia, so we had this meeting. I go to Charles. I say, hey, Charles, there's an opportunity in Georgia. Should I check it out? He says, yeah, Dan, that's your job. Go do it. So I go down there. I spend about a week there. And literally, like, everybody's really looking to jump in, because one of the reasons why I love working in emerging economies, and I'm sure Charles it feels the same way, is there is always, and unless it's some sort of like, dictatorship that is just crushes this kind of thing, there's always this urge to leapfrog. and there's always this opportunity to make impact and to propagate things a lot better than you would in a developed economy. There's a lot more impact there. There's a lot more impact to be had. And so these economies are hungry. A lot of times they're hungry because they need a new way to progress, because the old way is just too slow and costs too much. And so that's why Georgia was so interesting, because it's Europe. It's a very well developed country, but there's still so much opportunity for growth there. And yeah, so I went there. I was able to meet with the Ministry of Education, the central bank, and eventually, yeah, we went to see the Prime Minister. The next time Charles came out with me, we kind of did the whole round. We signed with the Ministry of Education. We went to meet the Prime Minister. And yeah, it's Cardano is still there. I mean, the CF did the wine traceability project there. Great jurisdiction. I mean, I personally am looking forward to one day bringing Georgian wine on Palmyra.
I still have some of that wine on my shelf. It's been quite a bit since you guys were in Japan and then traveling to emerging markets. What has changed since that original vision that you had, even, since Ethereum? Is there anything that you find particularly exciting at the moment when it comes to emerging markets? And what are your thoughts on how Daniel is continuing this early mission and expanding this vision with Palmyra?
Yeah, so I had to learn the hard way how to do business in emerging markets. First, every country is a snowflake. It's different, and it has a culture and a way and a process. And you have to kind of learn the secret handshakes to be able to unlock that jurisdiction. When you talk about Georgia, it's like all these guys that are older dudes that speak Russian, and you just get shit-faced drunk with them and have that conversation.
Yeah.
It's how the Soviets did business, man. So that's how you do it. Japan, it's a whole radically different thing. You're still getting shit-faced drunk, but it's in a different context. But anyway, when we look to Africa, there it's fast-moving consumer goods, microfinance, and telecommunications are usually your three huge drivers. And then there's this bigger thing, commodities and ag tech. And those are the big things that if you touch it, you'll probably get yourself killed or run into some problems, because that's where China plays and nation states play in these things. That's the bread and butter of all that stuff. So it's the same when you look at, Sri Lanka or India or other places. Those are also huge markets for fast moving consumer goods, telecommunications, and for, commodities and other such things. And, right now we're touching very heavily the fintech side, in particular microcredit. We have products with Real FICO. That's John O'Connor, who actually joined the company around the same time Dan did. And there we found ways to get the NPL down from 40% to 2%. So that's the non-performing loan rates. And the interest rates down from like 85% to around 15 or less. Well, that pairs beautifully if you also have commodities with it. We don't do the commodities at IO. So it's really exciting to see things like Zengate come around, because how you get these things done is you create an ecosystem of partnerships. And some are on the identity and compliance side, and some are figuring out how do you do your credit scoring. Some of them involve the banking partners or the regulated entities, because you have a networks of people with licenses. And then some of them are, how do you do the agricultural side and the commodities side? And so as we open up Kenya, for example, I would love to see how we can drop in what they're doing in there, and it will fit very naturally, because it can add it as collateral for loans, or they create very natural marketplaces. You can create micro futures markets, these types of things, especially in the long tail.
Yeah, and we're actually we're already in Kenya. We're actually working with the Kenyan tea producers. One of our advisors, Joyce Maina, she's a very well-known Kenyan tea expert. She's in the UK, but she's originally from Kenya, and so she actually opened up that market for us. And I mean, that market is ripe for change, and they originally approached us at the World Tea Expo last year. There's quite a bit of innovation to be had there, but again, it's, as Charles said, you have to kind of tread carefully, because there's already processes in place there, and you don't want to, you don't want to upset too many people, so that there's not roadblocks. You have to speak to them and make them understand that this is in your favor. You can expand what you're doing. You can expand on the opportunity. if you just embrace this particular way of doing. So yeah, it's also cultural. You know, a lot of times, and we had this conversation, Charles, right? I mean, you really have to come in there and you really have to establish at least a local presence,
right,
for the people to really embrace what you're doing, because they have to see that their own people are embracing it. It's not just a bunch of dudes from somewhere out west that came in there and started telling them, oh, hey guys, you know, listen to us. We got a better way of doing things for you. No, no, no. You have to come in, you have to respect the culture, you have to respect the movement, and you have to show them that, look, we're here to stay. Because a lot of these countries, what they're actually afraid of is people coming in, taking stuff from them and leaving, because that happened so many times in the past. What we have to do is you have to come in, show them that you're staying, and stay and follow through. Because also, if you don't follow through, that is also going to be a big issue, because you're going to say, you know, these guys are full of crap. These guys didn't follow through. These guys didn't build what they were going to build. And that's it. It's going to fall apart, and it's going to carry over to other places. So you have to be very careful in these situations.
Yeah, and how do you spread the wealth around? You know, if nobody likes a predatory system where there's a top-down structure, you build something, the marketplace defines the dynamics, and it screws all the producers and consumers. And that's oftentimes what happens in long-tail commodity exchanges. And it's refreshing that somebody's approaching it from a fundamentally different viewpoint. And, you know, it's a natural partnership in that we need the credit data. Because if you're doing microfinance and you're saying, well, I need to do a 360 assessment of whether this person's creditworthy or not, I have to look at many different factors, and I don't have like, you know, a FICO credit score or something like that. I don't have a standard agency to come in and do that. So that meaningful engagement is what really gives you that. And commodity production is typically where people make their money in a developing economy, whether it be agricultural goods or mining goods or what have you. And it's usually very small scale. And unfortunately, that doesn't touch traditional markets. It goes through a series of aggregators, and it eventually gets to a national exchange. But all that small data is lost as it gets aggregated, whether it be to the washing station with the coffee beans or what have you.
This conversation reminds me of, you know, the Argentinian Cardano community, and how having that local presence there is actually what led to the success of the, you know, MOU with the university in Argentina. Daniel, could you provide an overview of the Palmyra platform and explain it and how it is disrupting the commodities industry through tokenization? Additionally, could you highlight some specific challenges you encountered during the tokenization process and describe how your team addressed these issues?
Sure. So, you know, this is something that Charles just mentioned. There is a problem with access in many of these markets, especially in the agricultural sector, especially in soft commodity sector, which is the bread and butter of most of these economies in some form. Sri Lanka being that, many African nations being that, Eastern European nations being that. And so essentially what happens is you have a $2.5 trillion gap in access to global markets and access to reasonable trade financing and access to digitization, because a lot of times these markets just don't have the infrastructure to accommodate modern systems. They might have one component, but they don't have another component. Like one of my interesting examples was that the Port Authority of Georgia. Georgia works a lot with Turkey. They do a lot of trade with Turkey, and Turkey actually forced, and I don't remember the exact details of it, but there was basically a time when they actually had to tell Georgia, upgrade your systems or else we can't do trade with your Port Authority, because they were still running something like Windows XP in 2018 or 19, something, you know, really, really outdated systems. And this is just a, you know, slither of the problems. I mean, a lot of times it's just problems in infrastructure, problems in access. And so Palmyra aims to solve that. And so we solve that with creating that global market access, to providing access to the individual MSMEs, where in a traditional sense, they would have to go through the aggregators that Charles just mentioned. And this is an issue. It's always aggregators. And it's not just because they're evil, but because they're the ones that have the access. And access is power in these particular situations. Now, if you give the opportunity inclusion, if you give this access and provide an easy way to onboard, then you expand this market, you expand the opportunity for everybody and create a more just a more robust ecosystem. So that's number one. So for giving access, giving an easy UX, an easy UI, an easy way to access these other economies. Now, what you do with it is up to you as a business, but at least you have that opportunity to do so. The next part is, of course, digitization. Blockchain tech and distributed and decentralized technology provides an opportunity for these markets to really leapfrog without having to spend billions in infrastructure, right? So you can use a decentralized system to run a lot of these tools very effectively without having to invest millions of dollars in infrastructure, millions of dollars in expanding your team, and all these things that in legacy ways would be almost impossible for these economies to accomplish. Now you can do that. We provide this tech. We provide the needed tech to digitize, to expand, and to scale. The other component is, of course, again, what Charles was saying, is financing. A lot of times in these emerging markets, there is a problem of access or problem of adequate access to financing. So in the case of commodities, it's a lack of access to reasonable trade financing. Reasonable trade financing in these economies is an expensive ordeal. A lot of times producers that can access this financing, they pay an upwards of 30, 40, 50% interest. And this inhibits the growth of these businesses. So with the Palmyra platform, what we'll offer is called Trade DeFi. And Trade DeFi, the idea behind Trade DeFi is to utilize blockchain tech and utilize a DeFi ecosystem to bring borrowing opportunities to producers at much lower rates. And of course, in turn, to bring lending opportunities to DeFi participants backed with the same tools that banks would use, things like warehouse receipts on chain, certifications on chain. So all of this, again, creates a de-risking profile or a risk profile that you can take advantage of, because again, bottom line here is risk. And that's why banks really can't lend to the smaller guys, is because of the high risk of these jurisdictions. With technology like with the blockchain tech, and especially with technology like Palmyra, you can de-risk, you can create that profile to adequately de-risk your investment so that you can bring in these participants and you can effectively give this opportunity inclusion to the people. So essentially that's it in a nutshell.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious. Do you guys think that the broader financial industry, is taking the idea of tokenizing all real world assets seriously? Or is this something that, us here think?
Well, if you take a step back on real world assets, there's some things that are fundamentally missing in the blockchain industry to be able to touch them effectively. And we're solving that with Prism and Midnight. And that's base infrastructure that upon which platforms can build on top of to finish and deliver that. So in particular, you need the ability to identify things and build reputations around things. So that's the whole concept of self-sovereign identity, DIDs, these types of things. And that's a cross-chain commoditized conversation. So there's a collection of standards and technologies that have to evolve, and then people just have to support them. And we as an industry have been trying for 10 plus years to get that over the line, and it's starting to make some substantial progress. And so we have standards like Anon-Creds and DIDCOM and other such things, and they're almost where they need to go. And Microsoft and IBM and others have been carrying that torch along with us at the DIF, the Digital Identity Foundation. More interesting is computational privacy. So there you have this concept that if I run a business, I have a public part and a private part. And there are no businesses that are 100% public or 100% private. If you're 100% private, you're not a business, because how do you talk to your customers? At least somebody has to know what you sell and do. And obviously, you don't want to reveal all your secrets. Like McDonald's isn't going to say how much money is in the cash register or something like that. I mean, it could be a trivial secret. It could be national security interests, like Raytheon with defense contractor plans for a missile launch system that's in a destroyer or something like that. So everybody says we want to blockchain all business processes, whether it be tea manufacturing and distribution or all the way up to national security interests. So, well, that works only if you have the ability to decide what's private, what's not. So that's what we're building with Midnight. In the process of doing that, then that gives it as a tool to people who build exchanges and infrastructure so that they can kind of pre-decide with their customers, their users, their suppliers, their consumers, what makes sense. And then you have an entire apparatus for real world assets. And what you notice is that there are artificial divisions that for some reason we put up in the 19th and 20th and 21st century where we shouldn't start looking at these things as separate things. For example, your mining claims, your land claims, your intellectual property, your labor, your actual commodities, your credit score, all these things, they ought to be aware of each other. But right now, your land is unaware of the people, unaware of the actual commodities produced on the land and these types of things. And it creates these enormous market inefficiencies. And then what ends up happening is there's replication in all of these different things. So when you create a next generation, for example, commodity exchange, you're taking into account the 360. All these different things that are there. Because at the end of the day, if I'm putting money in or I'm providing credit, I need to know that 360 to be able to assess, are these people credible or not? And do I think I'm going to get a good deal? Or if I'm insuring it, I need to understand the entire situation. If I'm providing direct foreign aid, I need to understand the entire situation, loan, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're trying to do is always at IO is talk about base infrastructure. And then we try to find great consumers that can come in and build on top of that base infrastructure. Cardano really pushed the ball in terms of great decentralization and governance and having reliable infrastructure that never fails. It's been around for like years and years and years and years, 24/7, doesn't go down. Awesome. Now the partner chains framework is bringing the interoperability, it's bringing the ability to add privacy and all these other things that you need. And then our identity stack with Prism, which is also open, brings that essential component. And eventually that works its way and to get integrated into these types of plays. And so we're real excited to see what people do with it and how they build on top of it. It's pretty cool stuff.
I honestly haven't thought about the efficiency that would come from knowing, having these assets actually talk to each other. Charles, what are your thoughts on the potential of tokenization to revolutionize the commodities market, particularly in terms of transparency? We already touched on the efficiency part, and as we aim to achieve this with Palmyra. Additionally, could you discuss any significant obstacles that might prevent tokenization from reaching its full potential in this sector?
Yeah, because there's a stack, and Dan can cover part of stack, and I'll cover another part of the stack. Where I worry about is the ability to prove facts and to anybody who wants to know at the level of disclosure that's required. So a non-creds or blockchain, really what you're saying is, okay, is it there? Is it of the grade and quality that you say it is? And if I purchase it, will that be honored? These are some foundational facts that you have. And it turns out they're really hard to prove in many cases. And you can't, with just blockchain technology, do all of that. There are legacy and social processes. What blockchain does is it creates the incentive layer for people in the legacy world to come on in. Then how you blend all of that together, you're kind of moving further up the stack. In terms of inefficiencies, usually when you're telling this story, you have as a business to figure out how to get 5 or 10 or 15 fragmented things together. And then your business model is not the marketplace. It's the fact that you're the first to crack the fragmentation problem. And then in the process of doing that, you end up gaining too much power. So then what ends up happening is the marketplace lords over the fact that they're the master of fragmentation, and they set prices and they set demand and supply. And then it always gets predatory towards the most vulnerable people inside the supply chain. And it's even in Silicon Valley. We all say, wow, Airbnb and Uber are super cool. This is super awesome. And people have created a way to liberate these illiquid things and make them liquid. Awesome. And then what ends up happening every year, the Uber driver starts making less and less money. Every year, the Airbnb host starts making less and less money. Why the hell is it that the marketplace provider has so much power when they own nothing? Uber doesn't own a single car and Airbnb doesn't own a single piece of real estate, yet they end up basically mandating terms to everybody because they end up controlling the protocol and the network effect. And so it's really essential that as you remove the fragmentation and you start bundling together, it's done in a way that pushes power and profit to the edges. And that's really what token economy is about. And that's higher up the stack. And I'll turn over to Dan. And he can kind of talk more about that view of it.
Yeah, it's really the part of the secret sauce is sharing economy. It's very important to create something like this because a lot of times, and this is what Charles was just speaking about, it's this solution to fragmentation that creates that centralizes power in a lot of these regions, and basically that's what the aggregators do, right? So they have a way to put all this together and then channel it to a market that will then make the purchase, right? So you're an individual coffee producer in, say, Ethiopia, right? You don't have access to Western markets, so you have to sell all your coffee to this one guy for a fraction of it. Like, for example, the Ethiopian coffee at Starbucks will probably that cup of coffee, only probably about 5% of that goes to the original producer, only 5%, if that. And that is because of the various aggregation that happens. And the reason why this aggregation happens is because the original coffee producer doesn't have the access to Starbucks to sell their coffee directly. So what you have to do, but this is not a sustainable model, because in the end, it suffocates markets. In the end, it suffocates economies, because it's just like with centralized systems, there is a single point of failure that can destroy an entire industry. So basically, you just have to hit a couple of these aggregators and the whole industry suffers.
Right.
And this has happened. This happened during COVID, because there wasn't a more decentralized, a more spread out approach to a lot of these industries, especially in developing economies. They suffered tremendously. They saw a huge decline in exports. They saw a huge decline in revenue because there just wasn't a way for these guys to do anything. Okay, so this guy is out of commission. What do I do? What do I do with my tea? What do I do with my coffee? What do I do with my grains? Okay, I have it, but what am I going to go out on the street and sell it? You can't do that. So that is, in essence, what you have to do is you have to create this decentralized sharing economy model that is sustainable and scalable. Now, also, how do you figure out what is needed for that? And is it traceability? Is it, say, on-chain certifications? Is it on-chain warehouse receipts? Is it financing, easier access to financing? It's kind of all of the above. And it is also knowing how to move around the pieces to accommodate particular jurisdictions, because not all jurisdictions can be painted with the same brush. So you have to be able to adapt, and you have to be modular when you're approaching these jurisdictions. And the bottom line here is also to listen to your target audience, to listen to your users, to see what they need, and to understand what is the needs of that particular economy. So it's almost like, I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but you have to think globally and locally at the same time when you're developing these systems, and understand that there's not one single solution to it all, because if there was one solution, somebody would have probably already found it. And a lot of times they have. But if there's more advancement needed, that means that is not the only solution. And so you have to try things, you have to move pieces around, and you cannot be opposed to pivoting. Because also, and look, with Cardano, we had to, the fundamentals stayed the same, but we had to move things around a little bit to make things work, right? It's the same with anything, it is the same with any kind of evolving system. You have to be open to change and open to pivoting while maintaining your core values and core principles. So, I mean, that's really the secret sauce of it. It's
and also
being agile.
Yeah, and also just the Amazonification of things. When Amazon started, it was a book company, but under the hood, they were marketplace. And then under the hood, they were web hosting company. Under the hood, they were an AI company. And so you talk about long tail market, do T well as an example, but then you actually have all the infrastructure for general purpose commodities exchange for long tail commodities and highly fragmented markets. And then you can grow from that to a larger, and eventually the largest commodity exchange in the world, by volume. And that's why we built Cardano, in Midnight, is for real world assets and to remove fragmentation and information asymmetries so people don't get screwed. Nothing would be more satisfying in my life than some farmer somewhere being able to verify that he's only getting 5% or 6% of the value of what he can sell his goods for. In fact, there's a book written by Mike Minnelli, and it's The Price of Fish. Turns out it's really hard to know what the price of fish are. You catch a tuna, like, how much is that actually worth? It's an extraordinary thing, and it just depends on who you ask. World of difference between the sushi chef selling it in Tokyo and Ginza versus the fisherman in Indonesia or the Philippines who's got it in the net. So there's a whole process there. The better job that we do as an ecosystem at putting these pieces together, the more fair markets become, the higher liquidity they get, the more velocity they get, and the more understanding we get about the nature and fragility of global markets. So I'd like to see that happen, and it's why we created Cardano in the first place, was to bank the unbanked, and part of that was also to make it fair, for everybody. And this is yeoman's work. It's not sexy to go to the tea markets of Sri Lanka or these types of things and work your way through. It's a real fun road trip, but to actually figure out how do I innovate there when people have done things the same way for hundreds of years is a daunting task. And then asking, how do you go from 1 to N, where you expand beyond that and grow beyond that? For example, I'm going to be in Argentina this month and setting up things for the Constitutional Convention, but we're also talking to all the local businesses. There's a huge commodities market down there. You better believe it, that if we find something that we think would be good for Zengate, we'll throw it over the fence as a professional courtesy, because we just want these ventures to succeed, because we know that embedded within their DNA is this idea that things ought to be fair, and we ought to build markets for everybody, not just somebody.
Yeah, it's really working with Charles for all these years and kind of seeing. Again, starting from that initial conversation that we had, the first conversation we had, 8 years ago over Skype, and kind of working in that particular environment. I was what really did drive me is the vision. It always drove me. It always this vision of, like I said, opportunity, inclusion, of opening up access, of basically making a more fair system for people to take advantage of, not forcing them into it, not telling them you have been oppressed, but saying, okay, listen, here's that opportunity that you've been looking for. Now take it, because now it's possible. Those first principles really is what really kind of inspired me through my work at IOG. And that's what inspired the creation of Zengate and the creation of Palmyra, because I believe, and our team believes, that we're working along on the same first principles as Cardano, and the same first principles as the Cardano ecosystem and as the Ergo ecosystem have been founded on. And really, it's not a struggle. It's not a struggle. If you really understand it, it's actually empowering, because if you really go back to these first principles, all these pieces fall into place. Why does this make sense? Why does this make sense? Why does this make sense? It all makes sense because you go back and you think, okay, so why am I in this? What is the point? And and then you start figuring out solutions. You start figuring out what will accelerate things and what will evolve things. So yeah, I'm very much still driven by those same principles that Cardano was founded on, and our conviction is stronger than ever.
Yeah, those first principles are what brought me into Cardano back in 2017, and it's been amazing to see Palmyra and World Mobile and even Book.io kind of push those principles and build products out of them. In the broader context of the sharing economy and DAOs, how does the community play a crucial role in shaping the future of systems like Palmyra? Daniel, how do you aim to implement a sharing economy model? And in what ways does it draw inspiration from or differ from the model used by World Mobile?
So again, it's all about the flavor, right? World Mobile is working on the same first principles. However, they have their own piece of the puzzle that they're solving right now with connectivity, which is actually very synergistic to what we're doing. Now, the whole idea behind the Palm DAO is the decentralized business development treasury ethos, and essentially where that came from is this community's eagerness not just to cheer on the development, but to actually be involved in the development. And this is actually, again, the idea behind Catalyst. Why is Catalyst so successful? It's because Catalyst is a place that will aggregate ideas, and they will give them a real chance at being funded and being developed. And so this is, again, this is where the idea behind Palm DAO came. We had a constant influx of community members, not just saying, hey guys, you're doing God's work or whatever, which is always inspiring. It's always great to have community support, but they would come to us and take it a step further. They would come to us and say, hey guys, I have an uncle that is say a tea producer in Sri Lanka, for example, right? I have an in with that industry. I know 10 different tea farmers that they can utilize the system. I can totally see how they can utilize the system. We can bring them on, and these guys have problem with access and they have problem with transparency to bring their product to the Western market, and they already have people interested. I can make this opportunity work for you. And so in this case, right now we're taking these opportunities and we're actually white gloving them, and we're saying, okay, we'll put the business development team on this. We'll put a couple of guys on this. They're going to work with you. They're going to make this happen. They're going to talk to the producer. They're going to onboard the producers. They're going to onboard the buyers. Now, as you scale, you can't have a business development team of 100,000 people, because if we're talking about massive change, we're talking about global change, you have to have a sustainable, scalable model to do that. And so this is why this business development treasury is so important, because in this case, the person that's bringing the initiative can take the initiative themselves and grow it out. So essentially what they'll do is they will submit a proposal, just like with Catalyst. The community will vote on the proposal, just like with Catalyst. And if this proposal is in line with the ethos of expansion and of scaling of the Palm economy and the Palmyra ecosystem, it'll get funded. And then this person can go and do that business and bring that business to the platform, bring that business in a sharing economy type of way. So this is why it's so exciting, because it's not only telling the community, hey, thank you so much for your support. It's saying, okay, guys, here are the keys. Go and do this business if you can do this business. And if not, we'll find you somebody to do this business with. And again, this is how it happens with Cardano Catalyst. This is how it happens with ErgoHack. A lot of times you don't have somebody who knows that can do all the pieces. So you have to put together a team. You have to put together a team that is, they're specialists in this particular region, that particular region. You put it together, you bring the proposal to the community, and you say, okay, listen, we got all these pieces checked off. This is a real thing. We can bring it into the ecosystem. And this is what we want for the Palmyra ecosystem and for the Palm economy, is for people to take that initiative, to put these things together and to create innovation and to create opportunity and to grow it and to essentially be at a point. And this is, this is what Charles is doing right now, because, and throughout the years, I heard this, you hear this constantly. It's like, oh, Charles, he doesn't care about Cardano anymore. He's doing this. He doesn't care about Cardano. He's doing that. He wants people to replace him. He wants the Constitutional Committee to replace him. He doesn't want to do any. He just wants to fly around in his helicopter and stuff. Well, I mean, it's nice, but that's not really it. It's about evolving the ecosystem, right, Charles? It's about it can be about you all the time. It has to blossom, and it has to graduate, and it has to be self-sufficient. And that is the only way to scale it. It scales beyond one person. It has to scale beyond one person for it to be sustainable. And this is what we want, and this is what I want for the Palm economy, is to scale it beyond where Dan is. We still want to have Dan there, but we don't necessarily need Dan for this thing to keep scaling. And this is the same thing with governance. There will come a time where Charles, yes, we respect Charles. We want Charles to contribute to the ecosystem, but Charles doesn't have to be the CEO of Cardano anymore. The community is the CEO of Cardano.
Right.
And that's the bottom line, right, Charles? I mean, that's what we're heading towards.
It's so funny. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. I make a video saying, hey, look, we got the ICC, and I'm so excited that it's finally in place. And by the way, IO is not going to serve in the CC or as a DREP, after full governance turns on. They say, oh, Charles is abandoning Cardano. He doesn't care about Cardano anymore. And then you say, well, we'd like to stay. And you'll be like, oh my God, Charles is a tyrant. He never wants anybody to be in charge. So you can't win, no matter what people say. But when you take a step back, the spirit of what you're saying is decentralization is good when you're talking about an economy. And I agree completely. You have to be able to measure it, which is why we created the EDI with the University of Edinburgh, and we're starting to figure out how to apply that in different projects in different contexts. And the spirit of the question is like this DAOification of things. It's a complicated thing. Associations, trade groups, members-based organizations, DAOs, cooperatives. Mondragon's one of the largest cooperatives in the world. It's been in since the 1950s. It was set up by a Catholic priest, I think, in Spain. Gives you a sense that people have been talking about this for a really long time. And at the core of it really is saying it needs to be fair. And if it's a multi-sided marketplace, both the producers and consumers have to feel like management's not getting in the way of what they do. And what's really cool is if you look at all the different things like MetaGov or what we're doing in Cardano, or just some of the Cardano projects like Drip Drops and others, everybody's having deep conversations about what is good governance and how do you get people who participate in the marketplace not only just to be a passive participant, but an active participant in the governance of that marketplace. And really the token economy gives you the power to do that. We all as project leaders have to figure out what's the pace that you do that at, where does you have explicit versus delegative authority. And we're figuring that out in Cardano land right now, from everything of how to write a constitution to how to run an on-chain government to what institutions are necessary to be able to facilitate and turn complexity into simplicity. You asked about World Mobile. There it's complicated because it's really hard for a decentralized entity to own spectrum. If you look at the ITU or you look at any of these specific laws, everything is written in the direction of company XYZ owns a lease on spectrum A, B, and C from nation state. It's really hard to get them to conceive that some DAO is going to go and license spectrum and give it legal character and agency. So, we recognize that. And so the ADGM created the Digital Ledger Technology Foundation standard, creates legal character for a decentralized movement. We created the DAO law in Wyoming. So, it's one of those things where there's a bottom-up approach where many different jurisdictions are creating kind of legacy pipelines that you can embed in. So far, that works for unregulated entities. What remains to be seen is how do you get to the next step where maybe you need an RIA, or you need some sort of bank license, or you need some sort of exchange license, like the CFTC, for example, traditionally regulates commodities exchanges inside the United States. So how would that get grafted on into a decentralized marketplace that crosses borders and jurisdictions, runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and perhaps is collectively owned by a group of token holders, some of which are publicly known and have stable identities, and some of which are not? It's a fascinating question, and it's something that every regulator in the world is trying to figure out right now. And it's really cool to see Dan and his group kind of be on the vanguard of that, and they're forcing uncomfortable conversations at the moment.
Yeah, it's you touched on this, and that is why it's so important to try and be as straight and compliant as possible in these particular situations. This is why, this is why, for example, we KYC. People don't like that, right? Especially in this particular part of the palm economy. They didn't. Some people say, "Oh, KYC is against what we're here for." Well, look. What we're here for is to change the paradigm, right? What we're here for is to go out to these organizations and to show them that this is a way for you to, there is a way for you to de-risk. There is a way for you to regulate in this particular environment. And what we do, say, well, for example, what USDM does with the way they launched, is very much future-proofing yourself when you're actually going out there and you're talking to regulators and you're expanding cross-border and cross-agency to show them that, yes, you are in the business of compliance, you're in a business of reasonable and smart legislation, right? And so this is essentially what is needed to build a business in these particular environments. Build a business or build an ecosystem that can, say, accept licensing, because as I said before, we're looking to actually become the first fully licensed hub and spoke commodities exchange that utilizes tokenization and utilizes blockchain technology in concert with Web2 technology. For this, you need licenses. You go to get this license, you have a bunch of skeletons in your closet, and you launch something really stupid back in the day, they'll look at this. They'll say, hey, guys, you know what? This doesn't look good. You can't proceed. You cannot do that. And this is a fiduciary responsibility that we have right now to the future of the project and to the future of the ecosystem to do all we can to actually have these uncomfortable conversations now and to have these uncomfortable conversations along the way so that it changes the paradigm. And I mean, just to give you an example of these, what the evolution these uncomfortable conversations have. When I went to Georgia for the first time in 2018, one of the meetings I had was with the Bank of Georgia, the Central Bank of Georgia. And we sat down, and they had a meeting with us. We sat down with them. We just started talking about generally, what crypto does, what stable coins can do, and this whole funny business that we're in. They listened and they were saying, you know what? Yeah, we're aware of this, but we're not okay. We'll just don't call us. We'll call you.
And I've had that conversation too, by the way.
I know you have, Charles. I know you have. Fast forward 3 years of constantly going, hey, by the way, guys, you know what, this, we're not calling you. Okay, call us when you're ready. But here's this information of what we're doing. Here's that information, what we're doing. Oh, by the way, you know what? Regulation in this particular field can actually be complied with because we have this technology here. We have this set up here. Fast forward 3 years, this bank, the Central Bank of Georgia, had a conference for stable coins and basically how to create a digital central bank currency. Well, they called it CBDC, but it was really a stable coin, which was actually a lot more, a much better instrument in that particular sense for the bank to utilize as a tool in their tool chest. And like I said, and they invited us, they invited Ripple, they invited Ethereum, they invited all the big players to have this conversation. And like I said, this was a conference. They dedicated time to this. They dedicated resources to this. This is the same group of people that 3 years back said, sorry guys, but this is too scammy for us to listen to. We're not interested right now. 3 years later, they were very, very interested. And you just have to keep at it. You just have to keep pounding at it. You have to keep in there, and you have to understand that at the end of the tunnel, if you just plow through this stuff, there's always a solution. It's just a matter of tuning into that solution and staying with it, sticking to it so that you can get to a point where this solution or these solutions can be implemented and deployed so that you can make this change that your first principles are guiding you towards.
Yeah. And Peyton, if the conversation's not uncomfortable, you're not innovating. There's just, these markets are too big. There's too much going on, and you can't have half measures in what you do. You have to really be out there, and you have to kind of force people to rein you in a little bit because you're revolutionary and you're carrying the torch. You're like, we're going to go burn this down. We're going to build something new, and it's going to be better. And then you're like, okay, all right. Like we understand. Let's scale back a little bit. And you're all right, fine. But that's what we try to do in the cryptocurrency space, because honestly, what are we talking about here? We're talking about taking markets that move at the speed of paper, not even digital, but paper, with human beings that go to bed at night and maybe trade for a few hours, a few days a week, and they take the bank holidays and Christmas off and these things, to markets that are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that have no geography. And that's such a profound revolution when you think about settlement time and liquidity and these other things, and the fact that it's not just one market, but you're putting insurance and credit and all these other things because they're neighbors of it, and eventually they'll all be one thing. And you talk about very complicated bundled products that the poorest people in the world can trade, not just Goldman Sachs or Morgan Stanley or BlackRock. It's a really powerful concept. And so it's revolutionary because it requires everybody to get a little uncomfortable. And they also start realizing that maybe their business models aren't so sound and stable. And maybe they're going to get their lunch eaten, just like the internet fundamentally changed print media and you had to adapt or die. So it's exciting to be on the forefront of all these things. And we always try to, push as far as we can go, as fast as we can go, but somebody's got to do the yeoman's work of actually going into the jurisdictions and doing the last mile of wiring in the legacy into the crypto side. because it's easy for me to sit here in Longmont, Colorado, in my comfortable lazy boy chair, and go ahead and write code and talk to people and do things. It's a lot harder to actually physically travel to the jurisdiction, sit down with the person. It's 122 degrees, high humidity. The air conditioner doesn't work. It hasn't worked in 6 years. And sit down with this guy and be like, let's talk about public key cryptography. Like, what the fuck? You have to go through that whole conversation, that intellectual house. But that is the work that changes the world just as much as the protocol development is, and these types of things. And you need to merge both sides together in order to get it done.
Yeah, it's something that I kind of also experienced myself, and of course during my tenure at IOG, I did a bit of travel, but I am kind of in the same place where Charles was in the beginning of Cardano, where you just have to be out there constantly out there, going to the place, right? You can't just delegate from my Japanese lazy boy chair and tell Sri Lanka what to do. You have to go there. You have to set up operations on the ground, which is what we did with Zengate. Zengate SL was set up last year. We have to hire staff. I have to be there for that, and it is fucking hot in Sri Lanka. And you still have to go. You still have to go to these meetings. You still have to be presentable. You still have to talk to the right people in the right context. You have to show them that this is the way to go. And this is not glamorous work, because people think, oh, travel, it's so great. You guys get to go to all these places. You get to go to Southeast Asia and Africa. It's not a vacation. You go there to work. You go there to change. And it is uncomfortable a lot of times to go into these meetings. You have to have you really have to, like I said, you have to keep going back to why you're here in your mind to be the most effective. Why am I here? What am I doing here? What brought me here? Because if you forget that, then there's no point in you doing this stuff. But if you do remember that, then you will go to these meetings, and it is fucking tiring. It is really tiring. A lot of times it wears you out. I mean, like I said, I remember you traveled, what, like I said, like 340 days out of the year for how many years? And Charles, I mean, Charles would still be, up all hours of the night, having meetings with me, having meetings with other people, and traveling and doing this and doing that. And you have to do that. And that is what moves things, because you have to be there on the ground to move things along, or else it's not going to happen. It's a world, right? And the world is big, and you have to be, you can't be everywhere at once, but sometimes you have to. So that's, it's just the nature of the business. If you want to change things, you have to be where the change is happening.
We're at the end of this inspiring conversation. Do you guys have any closing words before we head out of here today?
Well, I'll support every builder. Dan has always been part of the family. Now he's in the extended universe, and it's always fun to see that. I love seeing people grow up. I remember there's this young kid that worked for us years ago. Dan, you remember Dionysus Zindros?
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and he created Nipa Pals and all this other stuff. And then, he's like, he wanted to leave home, almost like the uncomfortable teenager. He's like, screw you guys, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so after he graduated and got his PhD, he ended up landing at Stanford. And then we set up a lab there. We ended up actually working for us again, because the lab is connected to us. So you can never leave Cardano. You can never leave the orbit. We always find a way to drag you back in. So Dan went on into the Ergoverse, and he's got Zengate and in this whole Palm ecosystem, and now he's part of the extended family. And what's really cool is that he's brought a lot of good people with him, and they have a good mission and a good vision. And I always support, where and when I can, people that are trying to do things that are important. We might just look at this as tea and a commodity thing, but I look at it like, well, if one of these is going to take off, and whichever one does, if it takes off with the right values and principles, it's going to change the lives of millions of people throughout the world. And you can't, with a straight face, go to the London School of Economics and look people in the face and say, as I did, we're going to bank the unbanked, and not have these types of ventures in the portfolio. You need hundreds of them in different verticals, whether they be ATMs or credit or fast-moving consumer goods or commodities, because every single one of them is chipping away at the legacy order, the old order of things. And our job is, at this point, to make sure that there's support in terms of infrastructure and visibility, so people know that people are out there, and their job is to be in the field and get it done. And we all try to collaborate and work together where and when we can. We can't always, but where and when we can. we try to be there and get these types of things done. So I'm kind of proud of your growth, Dan, from Osaka in 2016 to this long 8-year journey. We ate a lot of meat together and cheese in Georgia. Holy God, whenever you have these meals, they bring out like 15 steaks and all this cheese and this other stuff. And that's the appetizer. And you're like, wow, that was a great meal. And they're like, what do you mean? It's not over. That was just the first course. Like, God damn it. And of course they're Russian at heart. So their toast lasts like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. So you're just sitting at the table and everybody, one person after another, toast for 5 minutes, 10 minutes at a time. That's just great. And I remember we went to Vietnam together, all the time we spent there. And that was at Inamoto's event. Holy moly. I spoke before 3,000 people in that crowd. And that was a heck of a lot of fun. And that was before the big surge, so it's real cool to kind of reflect at when we were just doing some crazy shit. Nobody took us seriously, to see where we're at today, where we actually have a chance to change the world. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I remember those days very, very well, because I was fortunate enough to be there, with you, Charles, and to take these trips, to have these experiences, and it really did shape what the evolution, and so my work at IOG and my work with Charles has basically shaped what Zengate has evolved into and what is evolving into. I saw how these things were done, right? I saw how Charles did it. And like I said, I saw Charles doing it from a company of 5 people to this, to this huge ecosystem that Cardano is, to this beautiful ecosystem that Cardano is. Our first principles are still intact, after all this time. And, he gets a lot of bullshit, a lot of shit thrown at him. But you know what? I personally know Charles, and I can tell you that these principles are still, that he still believes in all of these things that were first there when Cardano was born at Royal Host in Osaka. And this is what I took with me when I parted ways with IOG and started Zengate. I said, you know what? This inspires me. Those early days, these trips to Vietnam, these trips to Georgia, these trips to to Taiwan. We went to Taiwan together. Various other countries, even stuff we did in Japan. Well, especially stuff that we did in Japan. It inspired me. It basically changed my whole outlook on what I can do as an individual and what kind of impact I can have in a team. And this is why I carried this over. I carried this sentiment over to Zengate. And this is why we always go back to this at Zengate. This is why I believe that what we're doing is the continuation, the extension of the Cardano and the Ergo ethos, and the Cardano and the Ergo values and first principles, because essentially it all boils down to the same thing. Bring opportunity where it doesn't exist. Have those uncomfortable conversations because it is for the greater good. And don't be afraid to change within yourself. And don't be afraid to get kicked along the way when you're introducing change into these other into these economies and parts of the world, because somebody has to get kicked. And if you want to be the innovator, you're going to get kicked over and over and over and over again. And you have to have the balls, you have to have the vigor to get up and keep going and be resilient and not forget why the hell you're here. And so, like I said, this is why I want to thank you, Charles, because you kind of instilled that in me. And I had a pretty long career before I met you. I had a career of development for almost 20 years at that point. When I met you, I was just kind of like, oh, this is interesting, and this whole experience changed me. I wouldn't have been able to do Zengate without the experience of working with you for all this time, and you kind of throwing me into the deep end and say, hey, Dan, go to Georgia and get us some business, go over there and get us some business, talk to this guy, the Japanese guy, because nobody else spoke Japanese at that point in the company. Talk to him. He's putting out misinformation about us. Talk to him, call him up, tell him he's wrong, tell him where the right information is. Like, okay, sure. All of this shaped what the journey is right now. And I thank you for that. I thank you for the support. And I want to thank the community for the support that they've given us, and they've given myself and my team because without it, without community, you can't build these decentralized systems. You can't build these sharing economies because there's nobody to share it with. So yeah, I just have nothing but the gratitude all around to everybody.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. And thank you to the audience for listening in. And I didn't mean to interrupt you, Charles. You had something?
Oh, just, one last thing about these things. These are communities at the end of the day. And so probably the most important thing is asking Dan a question. Like, if people are really interested in Palmyra and what you guys do at Zengate, how do they join? How do they become part of it? Where do they go? What's the call to action there?
Sure. So right now, the Palm economy is, well, first of all, you can check out Palmyra.app. It's actually live right now. We have over 20 producers, various different commodities onboarded, everything from Sri Lankan Ceylon tea to Japanese matcha to spices to Ceylon cinnamon. We have Zambian honey. We're going to have, we're bringing on Greek olives and Greek olive oil. We're also going to be bringing on Turkish almonds and Turkish hazelnuts, various other commodities, precious stones. We're going to eventually even be trading telecom minutes as commodities as well. All this is tokenized. All this is on chain. All of this is verifiable, and it carries all this transparency that and opportunity that we're talking about. And the system is expanding. We also have the Palm economy right now is having a public sale as well. You can check it out for the Palm token. We're basically launching the Palm economy. We're launching the sharing economy. This is where the rebate system is going to go into effect, the one that takes capital infusion from Palmyra and reinjects it into the ecosystem. This is, again, part of this open economy that we're creating. It's going to have Oracle incentives. It's going to have the Palm DAO. This is where the Palm DAO is going to live, is within the Palm economy. So you can actually check it out. You can go to our socials. You can go to palmeconomy.io. You can go to the Palm economy Twitter page and get more information. It would be great to have you guys along for the ride. And I mean, even now, if you have any questions, if you have any input, I'm always around. I'm always available. The team is always available, and we thank you for just giving us the opportunity to do this innovation. And I'd like to thank you, Charles, for your time today.
A lot of fun. I can't wait to see you guys in Argentina.
Yep, we're going.
Also, you're going to Rare Evo, right?
I am going.
I'll see you in Rare Evo. It's going to be some fun.
Absolutely.
All right.
I'm also looking forward to my first time in South America. If you guys made it to the end of the podcast, make sure you comment down below. Let us know what you thought. Leave some likes. Let's push this account up here. Thank you guys both for making our Monday night a bit more enjoyable. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.